Dough in its simplest form is flour and liquid combined together, all-purpose and water kneaded together. This combination isn't very appealing to eat though. If we bake this, we'd have a massive crust, starch, and gluten. If we add more ingredients to the dough, we'd hardly notice any texture change, but it would yield much different results from the new chemistry as it bakes. Let me give you an example. Together in a bowl, we're going to add a cup of all-purpose flour and a third cup water. Mix this together with a fork until combined and bring out to knead on a floured surface. Knead this rapidly to develop the gluten and divide into smaller portions that'll be rolled. On the top rack of a preheated 475 oven, we're going to bake the bread for 2 minutes. Flip onto the other side and bake for another 2 minutes. From the small combination, we made the Jewish flatbread matzahs, a dough baked into a bread in its absolute simplest form. If we add a few more ingredients, however, we'll get a different type of flatbread. In a big bowl, mix together 4 cups all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons salt with 1 2/3 cups warm water and a 1/4 cup veggie oil. With a shaggy ball formed, bring out onto a floured surface and knead lightly for about 5 minutes. This time, we're going to let the developed gluten rest for 30 minutes. What this does is 2 things. It makes the dough easier to manipulate because the dough won't be springing back, and it'll give a much softer feel in the mouth when eaten. When the 30 minutes are up, divide the dough into 12 smaller portions that'll be rolled out. This is where you'll notice the quality of your gluten formations, and whether you need to rest the dough further. This dough should not be fighting you whatsoever. Springing back means the portion balls should rest for another 30 minutes before being touched again. Once they're all rolled out into handsome circles, to a dry medium-high pan, we're heating them up for 1 minute on the first side and 30 to 40 seconds on the second side. By adding salt and oil to our water and flour dough, we made tortillas. There are so many different additions to water and flour that'll have a major impact on the outcome. You obviously know about yeast, butter, and sugar, but each of these are completely intentional to perform a certain task for the desired outcome. Sugar sweetens the dough slightly, but also feeds the yeast to create gases that will raise the dough. Butter helps make the dough richer, giving it a better taste. And if you add seeds to a dough, it'll add different textures to each bite, giving a variety to a bite and something more to enjoy. As you can see, this changes different things in the dough to create a different experience with different forms. Before we break down the different categories of dough, let's define dough. Couldn't pancakes be made from a dough? Crepes? Onion ring panko beer coating? No! Even though they are made from the same ingredients, when we change the solid-liquid proportions to be more liquid than solid, we no longer have a dough. We have a batter. Batters develop gluten as well. If you beat a pancake mix too hard, you'll have a stiff pancake instead of one that's soft and fluffy in your mouth. Resting the gluten also affects batter. If you can't avoid hard mixing, rest your batter the same you would a dough. Dough itself is a solid. It can be thick, tacky, shaggy, smooth, snappy, tappy, crappy, but the 2 categories we use to classify doughs are stiff and soft. Some examples of these are pasta doughs being stiff. They've formed a lot of gluten, they're dense, and require a lot of work to manipulate. When I made fresh fettuccine and linguine in our pasta episode, it took 12 minutes of constant kneading to develop the spring back I was looking for, and to create the chew fresh pasta trumps cheap, dry pasta with. I had to put some of my body weight into kneading instead of just some elbow grease for the small, little batch to get the job done properly. Meanwhile, bread doughs are soft, having lots of gluten, but also more liquid to combine with the flour's starch contents. When manipulating, it feels like a soft Play-Doh. Let's go back to talking about flatbreads. The difference between a flatbread like our tortillas and a loaf of white bread is the use of leaveners. A couple different leaveners used most commonly in doughs are yeast, baking powder, and cooking ammonia. When these agents are heated, they form gases that stretch the gluten into pockets, which is why different foods use different flours with different gluten content. Bread flour made out of spring wheat has a high gluten content versus cake flour made out of winter wheat, having a much lower gluten content. The gluten will hold differently when leavener gases form, giving different mouthfeel and texture. I sound pretentious right now, but this is what it is. Adding everything together is chemistry, and when you don't adhere to the rules of the chemistry, you get a pretty crappy product. You might as well go buy a loaf from the grocery store if that's the case. I think I'm getting to the point where I'm being anal for no reason. Baking is fun. Cooking is fun. This show was made so my friend Braden and I could have fun. I'm not trying to scare anyone away by elaborating on how dough works. The most you need to know is an ingredient list from a trusted source and what equipment to use. In time, fun will come.